cause of
Right,
the
but
challenge
what
of
are all
climate change.
these new op-eds I'm reading that say, can Shell Oil save us from climate change? And it's like, you know what? Maybe they could, but that's not the right question. Are they going to?
They
What's
they,
their...
w- they would if it were profitable.
Exactly.
They would if it were profitable.
So like,
If we give them enough money.
so like, let's say we like, in if we're living under the People's Republic of Walmart,
Right.
like if we switch to a centrally planned economy rather than a market economy, it would be easier to make the rational decision to produce the antibiotics that we need not to die from very basic
Yeah, because
things.
we would just democratically decide that's what we're going to produce, and it doesn't matter that it's unprofitable. We would just produce it.
The other example I think of that like comes to mind is palliative care. So it like really hurts to die and it really sucks, but making it less painful, you are not going to get returns on that at all. Like end of life stuff, it's completely there's a really good book by a woman called Ann Newman about this. And it's just like because of how profit motivated like we are, there's just no way to die with any kind of dignity or painlessness in America unless you just have a giant pile of money that you can use to just keep pumping yourself with morphine.
Yeah, look at Sheldon Adelson. He's still out and about.
He's got his little electronic wheelchair and his bodyguards everywhere. But yeah, it's like this thing that produces like a grotesque way of life from cradle to grave.
Yeah, we could. I mean, here's the bizarre thing: is that we could have so much more. Life could be so much better. The promise of socialism is not supposed to be this gray, sort of scarcely of like everybody living, wearing sackcloth.
Everyone's got the unitard. Everyone's
Yeah.
got like the gray
unisex
unitard, like the same ugly haircuts.
One
and then, like,
size fits
you
none.
You go to the store and there's like no product and like there's no colorful boxes. It just says cereal, like government cereal, and it's the same shit. But then again, as our friends Brett and Brian pointed out about the cereal or supermarket example, like it's all just the same corn. It's just different colors and dyes.
Yeah,
It's like the
open
same
up the
shit.
box.
It's the
It's a
same
bland
shit. It's just
can.
like a different cartoon character on each box.
Different
So you're
food
saying we can
coloring.
still have the different cereals under all the different cereals we know and love under the People's Republic of Walmart?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, the point is not to imagine what we will and we won't have in terms of what kinds of cereal necessarily. I mean, I think there probably is. It's probably fine to say that there's an irrational differentiation, there's differentiation where there isn't any real difference underlying there. But I think much more interesting than that, because that may, I mean, we don't know whether people do actually want those differences. I think much more interesting are things like the bizarre emergence of highly gendered soap packaging.
Right.
Where,
and like the pink tax that goes along with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, that's utterly irrational.
That's why I buy men's razors for my face and legs.
But so that is probably some sort of differentiation that we would democratically say that's absurd. That a household is now forced to buy two different types of razors when they really don't need to because of the enforcement of historic gendering.
I want a body wash for my balls and asshole.
My favorite one that I've seen lately is man yogurt, which just sounds like a
They've
euphemism.
had
this, I
It just
remember
sounds like
this
a
came out in
euphemism.
Poland like 10 years before here, just because Poland is extremely backwards.
There's some gender.
That was crazy.
things.
The first time I saw that, I was like, what is in there?
Yeah, I mean it's on the label.
Yeah.
At the same time, we should be very careful again. One of the great internal critiques of Stalinism was that of how gray it was, of the lack of consumer items. There were, no pineapples, no jeans, no Elvis records. When we want bread, but we
Some
want
of that
roses.
may have been rational.
Yeah.
We want bread, but we want roses too. And the idea that we don't need all these consumer items, well, some of them we don't, but it really should be up to us to decide democratically what ones we want and what ones we don't.
So looking at these examples, like Walmart and Amazon is an example of these giant corporations that basically are scale wise states, like
Yes,
comparable
yeah,
to, like you
effectively.
said, Sweden or any other-
International states.
Yeah,
at that.
international. Yeah.
Yep.
And they're global, and they're extremely good at planning, and they're extremely good at getting us all these things that
Fun treats that we love.
want and or need in our lives. They're very good at that, but yet, like, let's say, like, okay, like we expand that and like we have a like country like America run on the same principles of central planning. That's still one country that exists in a global market, and like Amazon or Walmart, there is a supply chain where all those nice, a lot of things that we like and want and need, sneakers or whatever, are manufactured in countries that are like would still be, or would it? I'm asking, would it still be leveraging the cheap labor of other countries to produce the products that are efficiently distributed to us here as consumers or citizens of a centrally planned America?
Right. So,
and like, what are the implications of that? Or like, are the, like, would that just be replicating the same kind of
In
capitalist
the absence of an
exploitation
international left
that goes on right now?
Well, this is the question: is socialism possible in one country? And I mean, my personal opinion. We don't talk about this in the book, but my personal opinion is that question has been firmly answered. That no, socialism is not possible in one country. It has to emerge as a global phenomenon. Now, how do we get there? That's another question. Again, we don't talk about that in the book. But if any country were to attempt to build socialism, you would immediately be confronted with questions not just of imperialism or dependence on extraction from other countries in potentially inegalitarian fashion, but also immediately you'd be confronted with capital strike and economic sabotage on the part of international finance, and so there's a range of reasons why socialism probably isn't feasible in one country.
I'm a
Maybe.
socialist.
I don't know.
I'm a socialist
It's
in
not
one
in the
country
book.
kind of gal, but we all know this.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not like, it's not in the book. I'm less skeptical. It depends what we mean.
We have
by
a
socialism.
range
you
here
can have,
on the couch.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's a big. The question is correct. I mean, and it is a big issue. To what extent are you? To what extent do you depend on those sort of conditions elsewhere, and then to what extent do you depend on sort of price, like international prices,
But also,
and the choices that are being made for you through that, right? Again, which are like that's deciding kind of how things relate to one another in a way that that isn't necessarily the kind of democratic thing that you'd hope would be happening.
But also, if we look at the way automation has improved, say manufacturing, textiles, things like that, and the fact that actually we do make things in America. That is like a big myth, is that like there are no factories left in America. There are. A lot of them are running on skeleton crews because they've become more efficient.
People don't make things in America anymore. It's,
right,
like the
right,
ones
right.
that
So the idea that like we are entirely dependent on the exploitation of the third world for absolutely everything we have. No, that's the way things are organized right now, certainly.
yeah.
And I think there's going to be an international economy, the toothpaste is out of the tube of the 500 flavors of toothpaste you get in America now. But the idea that everything is necessarily dependent on the exploitation of the third world, to me, is completely absurd. We actually can be domestically very efficient and can trade in an ethical way.
I mean, we do have to take into account that there are many products where the components are made in dozens of different countries. The phone in your
Certainly.
pocket, maybe 60 different
Consumer
countries.
electronics are the big one.
Consumer electronics, but almost everything that you from the paper, from the Kleenexes to the notebooks in front of you, mining is plays an enormous role in many of the aspects of that, as well as forestry and all of these things happen. We are fundamentally internationally connected economy now, and we're not going to retreat from that.
Right.
Nor should we.
Yeah.
So when we talk about developing democratic planning, we do have to think about extending that on a sort of global scale.
especially in the case of something like climate change or these big problems that we face that aren't concentrated in one country. If we burn fossil fuels here, they don't stay within the borders of the U.S. I mean, the other big asterisk here is we don't like. I think the book in many ways is sort of the book about where we are now. It's not really a book about like central planning in one country, in one city, in one neighborhood, or globally. It's really a book about the idea of planning and bringing that back and just bringing back this debate. Like we used to have these debates between the left and the right, and we used to put forward, strong kind of utopian arguments around this stuff. And then 40, 50 years of neoliberalism, and all of us sort of have, really constrained imagination. So I think we're sort of back at that stage where we just need to start bringing back these big old ideas for the left, and thinking about the fact that, we could put democracy into the economy. And then I think we're, far away from like large scale plans. Like what would it?
Especially since we have the success story. Like it's a mixed bag. As Marx once said, capitalism is a mixed bag. But like we do have this, I'm paraphrasing. We do have this success story of like, look, the capitalists can't say that planning doesn't work.
Yeah.
Their favorite projects are the result of very efficient planning.
That's effectively all we're saying. We are not. There's no blueprint in our book, in our little blue book, for how to build socialism. We are very modest and humble in what we're saying here. Hopefully, in that we are simply taking on the argument that planning at scale is impossible, and we are using the best examples that capitalism has to Walmart's the most profitable. It's the biggest corporation in the world.
Speaking of like the if we're going to say, if you're advancing the case that planning can work at scale and it could work at scale for a country the size of America or even a global economy, all of us have lived in a world where neoliberalism has totally won everything, and the idea, like it's just as Thatcher said, there is no other way. Markets are like the only thing that we have, and there is only the market anymore. Now we're living in a moment where like probably the best example for something like central planning, or why markets actually can't be the be all end all of anything, is global warming, right? Because this is like the one mega problem that like every human being on the planet is going to have to deal with and face. And it seems that like, capitalism and market economies are only driving.
Right, because the big mistake
exacerbating-
that capitalists make is that they say that capitalism is going to maintain capitalism, and it doesn't. It just accrues capital.
However, and like, and we hear a lot like, because, capitalism, it can only just grow and take more and more and more resources and put more and more carbon into the atmosphere. However, if I understand your book correctly, you're saying that it's not necessarily like you are sort of pro growth in a way from a Marxist and an environmentalist perspective.
Yeah.
And I suspect that will land on some ears as odd or even controversial. So can you explain why growth is important even when confronting a problem like global warming that I think many people understand as a problem of too much growth or too much technology or carbon, et cetera?
It's not a problem of growth. It's a problem of using of combusting fossil fuels. There's a few other things to do with land use change, but primarily it's about combustion of fossil fuels. Think about 30 years ago, in the 1980s, we were faced with a similar existential threat of the depletion of the ozone layer as a result of the use of chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, and things like fridges and hairspray.
Donald Trump famously, as Matt has pointed out, Matt has famously pointed out, Donald Trump on the campaign trail complained that hairspray is not as good as it was in the 80s anymore. And that is entirely because of, people got concerned about the ozone layer.
So it
does actually work as well. He just doesn't like, as a hairspray user, he just doesn't like the fact that it isn't actually releasing chlorofluorocarbons. That's the part of the hairspray that he liked.
And it wasn't the market that solved that. It was regulatory intervention, forcing technology switching on the fridge manufacturers and the hairspray producers and so on and so forth to use chemicals that that did not damage the ozone layer. So the 2 points there. One, it wasn't the market on its own. It was we didn't solve the ozone layer problem through markets. We did through planning. The second thing is there's more hairspray and fridges than ever before, and we've solved that problem. The ozone layer is healing. By about 2050, it should be healed. There are some things with respect that some factories in China may be cheating on some of these regulations. So there might be some
German
problems.
auto manufacturers very famously lied about their emissions for a really long time, and because they're Germany, no one checked their math.
Right. Yeah. So it didn't require a halt to growth in fridges and hairspray for us to solve that, and it doesn't require a halt to the growth in value, that in utility, in benefit to humanity, it requires a switching away from fossil fuels. But the market left to its own devices, because fossil fuels are profitable, in the absence of some regulatory intervention, i.e. planning, we will just continue to produce those.
Of some external standard that says this price is wrong, like this, dollar per gallon of gas is the wrong price. And the way we fix that under capitalism is we just say, like either a tax or whatever, something that changes that price into something else. And ideally, we'd like to have a better system of deciding what's valuable and what isn't. Like at basis, that's kind of it. Like what's valuable and what isn't, and how do we together decide what's more valuable than something else?
So like the creation of these inputs and outputs, it's about deciding like, what is a barrel of oil worth when you factor in like one of the prices is, breathing air or have drinking water sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Right.
And and the way we do that now is ultimately we try to convert all of that into money, into this one thing that we have that's able to compare like qualitatively very different things, like me living in a clean environment and me, like filling up my car with gas or whatever, right?
I was just gonna say that this is actually a really important conversation in terms of whether we identify markets as the cause of climate change, the problem of climate change, or whether we think of growth as the problem. I mean, Engels famously did battle with Malthus, the Reverend John Malthus, an early economist, but
famously associated with the fears of overpopulation, which
exactly.
is I think largely been discredited.